Hey guys, it's Kevin with my review for the first season or possible mini-series on HBO, of course being Lovecraft Country. What Lovecraft Country is essentially about is we center on the character of Tick Freeman. He is someone who is a former war veteran. He fought in World War II and things like that, and he also is someone who is very much into his ancestry and things like that. This is something that, you know, he cares a lot about, and basically one day he discovers that his father is missing, so he sets out on a road trip with his best friend, Letitia, and his Uncle George in search of finding his father, while also trying to deal with a lot of racism going on in 1950s America. Lovecraft Country overall, I was very excited for this show. Now, if you guys remember, way back in, like, May, which I feel like was a long time ago at this point, it really wasn't. It was only, like, 6 months ago. You know, I did a top anticipated shows of the summer video. Lovecraft Country was not on that list, and that's because I did not know it was coming out in the summer. Had it been, it definitely would have been very high up on my list, because this seemed like a very innovative and very different kind of show for HBO. You guys also know anything that HBO does, it piques my interest. I think they are top tier in terms of entertainment, top tier in terms of writing, all that kind of stuff. So I was very excited to see how this show would turn out. It took me a while to finally jump on it, but I finally did. I finally was able to finish it tonight, and I will say this is a very solid show. It's a very different and very creative show that I did enjoy quite a bit. But I do think there are a couple things that do hold it back overall from being one of the best shows of the year. I don't think it's really on that level at all. But it still is a very well done show, and there's a lot of things I enjoy about it. And we're just getting into right now, starting off with the cast. And that is easily one of the most consistent elements of this entire show. This is such a talented ensemble that has so many amazing actors throughout. I don't think there's a single performance in this show that didn't work for me. I think everyone is truly incredible. But we first have to talk about Jonathan Majors, who plays the main character of Tick, and I thought he was fantastic. He does a really good job of embodying how charismatic and fun this guy is, but also how emotional he is. There's a lot of revelations about his character. There's a lot that he didn't know that's going on in his family history. There's a lot more things that he's tied to. There's a lot of things that he's dealing with, and I think Majors handles all of that very well. Tick can sometimes be very stoic, but he also is very emotional. He's a good combination of the two, and he's a really well done. He's a very likable protagonist, I think. I think he's someone that a lot of people are going to find themselves gravitating towards, and I enjoyed Majors a lot here, and I'm very happy to see him get a leading role. He's always been one of those actors where everything he does, he sticks out to me, but it's really good to finally see him really have a show where he gets to show just how great of a talent he is, and I really like what he ended up doing here. For me, though, the big standout of this entire show, though, is Jurnee Smollett, who plays the character of Letty, and she is incredible in this show. Letty is someone who, yes, she is Tick's best friend, but there's a lot more going on with her. There's a lot more of an emotional baggage that she's dealing with. She has a haunted past. She has a lot of things that are unresolved in her life, but she also is very much a badass. She very often will get people out of situations, and Smollett is just an absolute star in this show. And between this and Birds of Prey, I really think she's really showing off how she can be a really great leading actress moving forward. I really hope to see her in more stuff after the show, because I think she is incredibly talented, and I just loved what she ended up doing here. And the chemistry between these two is so great. They work very well together. I was very impressed by their chemistry throughout the show, and I truly do think it's one of the best parts of the show alone, is just those two actors. But the rest of the ensemble as well is amazing here. Aunjanue Ellis, oh my god, who plays Hippolyta, is truly amazing here. I really liked her acting throughout this show, where she ended up going. Courtney Vance as well is really great for what he has in the show. Michael K. Williams, though, we have to talk with him, because this is an actor that anytime he has a role, no matter what he does, he just puts 110% in it, and that is no different when it comes to Lovecraft Country. I mean, the character of Montrose is maybe the most emotional character in the entire show. There's so much that he has gone through. There's so much that's revealed about him, and the more we find out about him, the better William's performance really does get. There's a lot of things that he's been hiding, a lot of dark secrets he's had, throughout his life, and he has a very contentious relationship with Tick and things like that, and I just thought that Williams was such a standout throughout this entire show. I loved what he ended up doing here. I really liked his performance throughout the show. A really big standout for me, though, was Wunmi Mosaku, who I really haven't seen much of before at all, but I thought she was fantastic here. She plays Letty's sister, Ruby, and Ruby very quickly ended up becoming one of my favorite characters in this show. I really liked her in this show a lot. I thought that she gave a very well done performance, especially where she ends up going in the back half of the season. She has some of the most sympathetic material to deal with, and I really liked her for sure. Same with Chung, someone who is not in this show a lot, but whenever she pops up, she is a huge standout, and I really like what she ended up doing. Abbey Lee's really great here. Jada Harris, just a really talented ensemble overall. One of the best parts of this show for sure is the cast. Everyone just really delivers and gives some of the best performances that I've seen all year in terms of TV. But now getting into the directing and the writing, this is where we get to the things that I think are also really going to, are some of the most impressive things about the show. The directing here is very unique. The way this show is helmed throughout, it's not your typical show, because while, yes, it is very much a horror show, and there are a lot of scary elements throughout, it also is very much a period piece, and it's trying to combine both of those tones, and I think it does it really well. You care as much about what's going on in 50s, I think it's just as informative and just as emotional as it is horrifying. There are a lot of moments that definitely got me throughout the show in terms of horror. Episode 1 alone has some amazing moments that I think are really going to creep you out and definitely stick with you. But it also does a great job in telling a very, I think, relevant story about racism and about, a black family trying to survive in the best way that they can in a very tumultuous environment. And I think the show did a really good job in combining those two things. And Misha Green, as the developer of the show, I just think she deserves she deserves all the love, because she just did such a great job in helming the directing throughout the show. I was very impressed with the way she went about that, and I think it's definitely one of the best parts of the show for sure. The writing as well, I think, is mostly really good here. What I really do enjoy about this show a lot is just how much it gives to all of these characters. There really isn't a single character in this show that feels like they didn't get something to do. Whether it's our main two characters of Tick, who very early on you see that he kind of has PTSD from being in the war, but at the same time he's trying to settle fresh, and he's trying to kind of move on from that, and he's trying to enjoy his life in the best way that he can, but there's a lot more things that are nagging at him, and there's a lot of other revelations that are getting in the way of that. Or you have Letty, someone who really wants to be something big. She's a photographer, but she's constantly in her sister's, she very much is someone that, again, has some baggage with her family. She's kind of abandoned some of them, and so she's kind of dealing with that throughout the show, and I think those two characters alone are very well written. But then you look at some of the other characters throughout the show. I mean, very early on we're introduced to someone like George Freeman, someone who is such a free spirit and such a fun character in that way, but he also is someone that is very well read. He cares a lot about his family. He almost is like a father to Tick more than his actual father, and I thought that relationship was very well done. So I think the show does a really good job of getting you introduced to all of these characters, who they are, what they've gone through. I think all that stuff is really well done, but also incorporating this very weird mythology, something that very early on you want to know more about. You know some weird shit is going on from the first episode, but you're not entirely sure how to comprehend it, and I think the way that they ended up really building on that mystery was something that I very much did enjoy about the show, and I think the writing is very good in that area. But the other thing that I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by is that the show is a very unique way of telling its story. Every single episode, besides I would say the finale and the first episode, are almost vignettes of sorts. Characters will have a story, and it will be an impactful story that does eventually tie into things, but it very much is like a one-off. So we'll have an episode like, say, Ruby, and her being upset about this girl at a department store, a white woman getting the job over her, and her actually getting the chance to potentially live that reality. But that only lasts for, like, an episode, and I think it does a good job at doing that. Or you'll have someone like, say, Hippolyta, someone who believes she likes what she's doing, but she doesn't feel she's living up to, like, her true potential. And so I think the show dives on that pretty well. And again, the way it's presented less as part of the story and more as a one-off. And I think that does work very well. It gives us a lot of context into who these characters are. It gives us a lot of context into the hardships that they're dealing with. And I really did like that a lot. But really the main theme of this show is about racism in America. Racism then and racism now, and it does a really good job of portraying that. Something as simple as a certain gesture a character will make. The character of Christina especially, from the second that you meet her, there's just something off about her. The way that she's acting towards everyone is very disingenuous, and there's going to be some sort of arc with her. And they really dive into the theme of white privilege very well when it comes to her. There's one scene especially that I thought was particularly very effective with her character, and I appreciated it a lot. Whether it's these police officers who are just so utterly demeaning and disgusting to every single character in this show. They view every single black person they see as like a predator, or they view them as like a criminal, and it's just, it's absolutely horrific to think about, but it's something that we do still see now, and I think the show does a really good job of really getting you into that setting and seeing how this family has had to deal with this for a very long time. It's something that they are kind of used to, but there's also a lot that they don't understand. A lot of the white people, they feel very powerful, to the point where some of them have magical abilities of sorts, and I think that's something the show just does a really good job with handling. I think all of the racism stuff is definitely one of the best points of the show, and something that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy for sure. So I think that part of the writing is very good. The problem is, for me, and the thing that does bring down the show from truly achieving greatness, is that a lot of these stories, while great, just don't feel like they're gelling together quite as well as they are. And that's because while I enjoy a lot of the side stories, all of them I think are really well done. Whether it's the character, like I said, of Hippolyta and her kind of getting to live out the reality that the dream that she's wanted, or the character of Ruby getting to literally step into a white woman's shoes, for a little bit, and finding a way to do that, or whether it's the character of D, someone that has written all these comic books and takes a lot of pleasure in doing so, but is haunted by basically a different type of comic book, Jim Crow type comic books that depict, black people as these, cartoon characters of sorts. I think that stuff is really great in this show. When you're tying it into the full mythology, I just don't think it comes together as well as it should. It just feels a little overstuffed. It always feels like the show is really trying to do things on speed, and I think that's what does hurt this show. I think the show should have taken its time more with a lot of these characters, because again, there are some really great arcs going on here. I was particularly compelled by the character of Montrose, who is really billed as this terrible father who was not there when Tick needed him. He didn't confide in him. He just doesn't really want much to do with him, but there's a lot more going on with him than you think, and I think those revelations are very effective. I enjoyed that a lot, but when you're tying it with Hippolyta's story, or Dee's story, or Ruby's story, it just feels like there's a little too much going on this season, and I think it would have been better if it was just a bit more streamlined in terms of storytelling. I think what would have ultimately worked, and I think what they should have ended up doing, was either do it in a leftover style where you just have one-offs almost every single episode, and then you can, occasionally cut back to the main story and then tie it all up in the finale. Or this should have been a much longer series, because it really does feel like, though the show is billed as a TV series, they're really trying to make this like a mini series. They're trying to cram everything they possibly can into this first season. And I know they always say, like, when you are given a first season of the show, you want to make it as good as you possibly can. But I think what they saw that as is, oh, we have to literally do everything in the first season, when I feel like they didn't really need to. They could have easily waited on some of these things, because it really just feels like things are happening too quickly in this show, and I think that's what hurts it more than anything. In fact, the show is so fast-moving that the plot of the show is really not the actual plot of the show. That's only really the plot for, like, the first 2 episodes. It really is more an inciting incident than anything. There's a lot more going on besides that, which I enjoyed, but is also going to mislead a lot of people, because the trailers and things like that really made it seem like that's the premise. And again, that's really just the first big, like, sort of event that these characters are going on. From there, they have encounters with, like, with vampires and time travel and these weird creatures known as shoggoths and witches and warlocks and all this kind of stuff. So again, while that is the plot, it really is only like the start of the show, and I think that alone shows just how fast-moving so much of it is. Again, though, the mystery is very compelling. The story itself remains interesting throughout, and that is the thing that keeps me invested in the show. I think overall the writing is very good here. I just think that does definitely bring it down. The cinematography, though, is absolutely incredible on this show, because it's unlike most things that you see, these characters and things like that. I understand this is part of, H.P. Lovecraft's series. It's all based on his characters. It's all based on, like, his kinds of stuff. And Lovecraft Country is an actual, like, horror novel that, is trying to kind of, like, pay tribute to H.P. Lovecraft. And I think the show does a really good job with that in its visual style. It's very different. It's very audacious. It's very hard to describe in words, but it's one you truly can't take your eyes off of. And it's one of those things where when we talk about TV and how much it's constantly changing as a medium, I think Lovecraft Country is one of the best examples of that. Just the look and feel of this show is very different. I really enjoy its style. I really enjoy its aesthetic. It's weird. It's not afraid to get really gory and graphic when it needs to, and I think it definitely works very well in the show. Hell, just in the first episode alone, holy shit did they go all out in terms of the visuals. There is a car chase scene that you truly are never going to forget when it comes to this show, and the pilot episode is one of the best episodes of the show, and one of the best pilots I've seen in a while, just for this sequence alone. The way that it's handled, the adrenaline rush, but also just how horrifying it is. I mean, it is non-stop in terms of visual splendor and just visual arrest, and I think they do such a great job with that with this show, and they really just kept delivering when it came to cinematography here, and I just absolutely loved what they ended up doing. The look and feel of it all, it's so weird, but it also is just so horrifying, and it just works so well for this show overall. The 50s setting as well is really well done. You really do feel like you're in 1950s America. They do a really good job of setting that all up, and I really did appreciate that when it came to the look and feel of the show. So I think the cinematography is pretty much perfect here. I think it's one of the best elements of this show for sure. The score is another one of my issues, because I think the actual score is really good. Whenever there's music playing, the 1950s music, there's a running motif of this song that it's called Life Can Be a Dream, and I think what they do with that is really cool. What I don't love, though, is the anachronistic music that frequently shows up in this show. It just is jarring. It's very jarring. And, you know, I've seen it happen in other pieces of media before, and it hasn't really bothered me, but just something about it ruins the authenticity of the show. It ruins the realness of the show. This is a show that, though obviously it is very sci-fi horror-esque, is trying to be very brutally realistic. It is trying to capture things in a very dark light. And when you have like rap music playing, or you have the character of Christina walking out to Rihanna singing "Bitch Gonna Have My Money," it just really doesn't work in the grand scheme of things. It really just kind of took me out of it, and it became very jarring. And it doesn't happen a lot, but whenever it did happen, I definitely noticed it, and it was not something that I really enjoyed in this show. Every time they did that, I'm like, why did they go with this music cue? I didn't really understand why they did that, and it just made things feel a little bit hokey and corny, and I did not like that. So yeah, I thought the score was just a little too inconsistent for my liking, and I've already talked about the editing. I think the pacing of these episodes are fine. I just think the way that they went about it, the storyline, it all just happened a little too quickly, and I would have liked it if they would have taken a bit more time to, you know, really focus on these characters and not so much on delivering heavy exposition or really trying to get to the next major plot point, because it does feel like at times the show is a bit more concerned with plot over character, and I think it would have serviced them more if they would have chosen the latter rather than the former, and I think that does bring things down overall. My other big complaint with this show, though, and the other things that do bring it down, one, the character of Jamie Chung. She has her own episode, and it's one of the best episodes of this show for sure. It is absolutely incredible. It really does a good job of showing what Koreans had to deal with during the Korean War, and how they were also kind of looked at in, you know, in a very, again, in a very demeaning way. There was a lot of racism that they were dealing with as well, and I think it sets things up very well. But aside from that, I don't really understand what role she plays in this show. It feels like she is very much used as a plot device, especially in the last half of this season, and I just did not see the point of her throughout the rest of this season. I felt like they had a really good one-off, but they didn't know what else they wanted to do with her, and it just ultimately didn't really work, and I think that kind of did bring things down. So I think that didn't really work in the show. But my other big problem with the show is the finale. The finale of the show is just really not good at all, and very much confirmed a lot of my problems throughout the season. It doesn't feel very satisfying, and if they are coming back to a season 2, I honestly don't know if I want it. I really don't, because the way that they ended things here, I just don't know what else they can do in this show. It felt like they did everything they could in this first season, and that's a problem. I don't think they should have done that. I think they should have waited on some of these storylines. I think they should have waited to introduce some of the plot threads that they did, and I think that ultimately is what did bring things down here. So again, I think just the way things wrapped up in that finale, not only was it very predictable, but it went in a direction that I just didn't really like, and it just didn't feel very satisfying, and I think that very much did bring things down overall. But now I really do want to jump into spoilers, because there's a lot to really talk about that happens in this season, a lot to dive into. So if you haven't seen Lovecraft Country, now is your time to watch the show. I very much would still recommend it. I think it's still a really well-written show. I just think there's a lot of things that they could have done a little bit better. But let's just get into it. So I think the first thing I really want to talk about is George's death. He dies in the second episode of this show, and this was one of the things that I actually didn't feel was that unsatisfying. It's unexpected, for sure. You don't think they're going to go in that direction, but I do think this was the right move for the show, because George was a character that served as someone that was always there for Tick. He was someone that kind of put a boundary between him and his father, And so having Montrose enter the picture, if you would have also had George, I just don't think it really would have worked. So I wasn't upset with George dying, but that being said, I would have liked to take a little bit more time in building up to it, because it didn't really feel like, watching episode 1, that this is where we were headed, you know, to George's death, literally in the second episode. I did not think that was going to happen here, but once we got Montrose on screen, it very quickly, you know, it very quickly did not become an issue, because I thought Montrose became one of the most interesting characters of the show. The fact that he's gay, and he's been hiding this because of the fact that there was another kid that, there was another guy that revealed this, and, you know, he was, like, lobotomized for it and things like that, and so George has been so terrified, you know, and so Montrose has been, like, so terrified of letting Tick know about it, and you can see that Tick is obviously very upset about this, but he also holds a lot of animosity towards his father already, and I think, you know, it's a moment that kind of does bring them closer together, and I really did like that overall. I think that was one of the best moments of the show, and when we eventually find out that, you know, in the 20s, when the Tulsa Massacre happened, he ended up having to basically say goodbye to this one kid that he had a thing for, but it didn't work out because of the fact that, you know, it was the 20s and he was gay and he wasn't accepting of it, and it's a very heartbreaking moment, and you can see that Montrose, this is like the first time he really is opening up to Tick, and I really found myself liking that story a lot. I think that was one of the best parts of this show, is the relation between Montrose and Tick, and it was one of the only parts of this season that towards the end, you know, felt satisfying, felt like, okay, this ended on a good note, with now Tick having to hide things from Montrose, and, you know, eventually where they end up going in the finale. I thought they did a good job with that overall. I really liked the way all of that was done. I also really enjoyed the arc with Letty and Ruby, because these two have a lot of friction as well. Letty did not go to her mother's funeral because her mother was not there for her when she really needed her, and Ruby holds a lot of, you know, she's, you know, she holds a lot of that against Letty because of it. There's a lot of, again, contention there, especially the fact that Ruby wants to be seen as this, you know, she wants to be, you know, a singer. She wants people to recognize her. She wants to be in this department store, and it's just not happening. And that's why the character of Christine, I think, really work. I think the best moments with Christine were her interactions with Ruby. These two getting to know each other. These two having a mutual relationship for each other, but also Ruby getting to realize, like, how she can use Christina's magic to her advantage, with her having that moment of her as an actual white woman and getting the chance to live out her fantasy. I think that stuff is really well done, but you always know that there was more going on with Christina, and that's why that character never really worked for me as well as she could. I think she works really well as the symbol of white privilege, someone that, you know, just as much as she tries, she can't understand the pain of what some of these characters are going through. When Ruby is talking to her about Emmett Till, Dee's friend, or, you know, and Emmett Till was, of course, a real person, and she's talking to her about how much she feels, you know, how emotional she is in this situation, and, you know, Christina flat out tells her, like, I don't care about this. You really do feel it, and I think the show took Christina in the right direction for sure, and I thought their interactions were really well done, and, you know, Ruby feeling trust towards Christina and Letty doubting her, I thought was a really good storyline, and that's something that I did enjoy a lot in this show. I liked where they ended up going with that, and I liked that ultimately, you know, Ruby did save Letty in the end. She realized Christina's true intentions, and she sacrificed herself because of it, and I think that was overall a good moment. I wish we could have seen it. I really do. I wish we could have actually seen how that played out. But I do think that was a really satisfying arc for sure. I liked the way they wrapped things up there. The things that didn't work as well for me, one was Hippolyta. I get what they were trying to do with her, where, you know, she always looked at Dee's comic books and felt like there was more that she could live up to, and she basically gets to live her life as like this intergalactic, like, superhero of sorts. And I think that's a fun idea, but it's one of those things that didn't feel quite as utilized as it should. Her episode, while really good, is probably next to the finale the weakest episode of this season for me, just because it all just feels like it's happening too quickly. I wish this was something that we gradually built up throughout the season, and we really didn't. It was more about her searching for like answers to George's death, and I don't think the show did quite as good of a job with fully diving us into all of that. I think they could have definitely taken some more time there. And her coming back as like this like superhero, has all these powers. It felt a little silly. It just was a little bit silly, and I think they could have done it better than they really did. Same with Dee. What ends up happening with her and her like losing her arm and getting this like metal one. Again, good idea, but something they really could have waited on doing, and I wish that they, could have done a better job with that overall. I think they could have really dived into that more. So I think those were storylines that were good, just definitely could have been handled a bit better. The stuff that I think really was alienating, though, especially towards the back half of the season, was all the mythology going on with Tick. I'm fine with the idea that he is, like, Titus's son, and that he pretty much is someone that is going to participate in this ritual of sorts that Christina wants to perform, and you know that there's a nefarious intent there. But then everything going on with the Book of Souls as well, it just felt like too much. I feel like the show should have focused on his sacrifice this season, and then the Book of Souls in the next season. It just felt like there was too much happening there. And then, also Letty being marked and her having, like, Cain as a mark as well, I think is interesting, but again, just something they needed to do more with. Tick seeing Hannah, again, a good idea, but I think they could have done more with that. So, again, there's too much mythology happening all at once, and I think that's something they really could have waited on. And also, Tick and Letty's relationship just didn't feel very natural to me. It felt like it was very rushed in terms of 1 second they're friends, and next second they're fucking and they're lovers. And it didn't feel like a natural development. It felt like the show just really wanted to get them to that place so we could have that revelation of, oh, Letty's pregnant and it's with Tick's child, and Tick's child is going to grow up to write this book all about his parents and things like that. Which I think is an interesting idea, but overall, it just felt very rushed, and I wish they really could have waited to build up that relationship a bit more, because it all just felt like they got there a little too quickly. Getting into the finale, though, that's where we get to my major issues here, is just, I think there was just way too much happening in this finale. I mean, between them trying to save Dee from what happened to her, and they very quickly do end up saving her, and then you have Tick going on this quest where he is trying to stop the ritual, but it doesn't fully end up working. It doesn't end up working in the way they wanted, and then Ruby being duped by Christina, but Ruby actually saving them. There's so much happening in this finale, and it just didn't feel like this is where we should be. It all just felt like it was happening far too quickly, and the thing that really puzzles me is the way they decided to wrap things up. The ritual doesn't work in the way that Christina wants it to, but Tick still sacrifices himself. He's still dead. It doesn't seem like he's coming back, and even if they were to bring him back, I don't really know what else they can do here. I understand that there's time travel and there's other things that they can end up diving into, and I think that's a good idea. And that's something I enjoyed about the show, is that they always went for the weirdest ideas. But I feel like they've done everything that they possibly could, and Tick dying especially, it feels more like the end to a miniseries than a series, and if this is how they're going to wrap things up, it is not a satisfying ending very much at all. And Dee also killing Christina, I didn't really care much either, because those two never really had much interaction. I think Letty definitely should have been the one to kill Christina, because Letty was the one who always saw Christina in the way that she was, and I think think that D killing her, I understand she has the robotic arm, it just felt like something where they thought it'd be cool. They thought it'd be a cool way to end things, and it just didn't really work for me. It felt like a weird, like, alternate scene that we didn't need. And you know, I understand, I like the idea that they've wiped away all white people of their magic. I think that's a great idea, and again ties into the racism aspect of the show very well. You know, all of that was portrayed really well and things like that. But I just think that ending shot just did not need to happen in the way that it did. So again, there's a lot of things I liked, but there are just a lot of things that I think could have been done way better than they were, and especially in this finale, it all just felt like it was happening far too quickly than it really should have. So overall, Lovecraft Country, I think, is a very entertaining and very creative show. It's got some really incredible performances from the entire cast. It has a very specific visual style. It does a really good job of being an allegory on racism, but also really giving us some really good individual character stories. It does feel very rushed, and it isn't the most consistent show either. And the way that it does wrap things up, I think, is pretty unsatisfying overall. But at the end of the day, I definitely did enjoy the show. It's a show that very much did affect me. There are a lot of moments that I am going to remember, and I don't think the show was completely ruined by its finale. I just don't really see where else this show can go after it. I can still look back on the things that really did work. I can still look back on the things that I very much did love so much about this show, and overall I can say that I definitely would recommend watching it. So I am going to give Lovecraft Country overall a B. Again, I don't know where the show is going to go moving forward, if this is a mini-series or if it's going to have a season 2, but either way, I still would recommend checking it out for sure. But that's really for my review of Lovecraft Country. Let me know what you guys saw of this show overall, left your thoughts in it. I know it took me a long time to get to this show, but I'm glad that I finally did, so I was able to finally discuss it. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.